Hello girls, welcome back. So today we are going to start with a new chapter, that is the circulatory system. Now, as you all know, all organisms, including us, that is humans, have some kind of fluid inside our bodies. These fluids are the distributing system, that is to supply substances, as well as a collecting system, that is to pick up substances to and from various parts of the body, including the smallest and the furthest cell, that is the remotest cell that is present in our body. So here in this chapter we are going to learn about the circulating fluids in our body, what they are made up of, and what is their function. Now, why is there a need for transport inside our body? Now, every organ in our body requires circulating body fluids. Now, why? Now, you learned in the digestive system, the food is digested and then it is absorbed by the blood. The nutrients absorbed by the blood, which has to be transported to each and every cell of the body. Okay, so for that, what absorbs the digested food? It is the blood. Similarly, the respiratory system takes in air and the oxygen is picked up in the lungs, and from the lungs the oxygen has to be taken or transported to all different parts of the body, to each and every cell of the body. In the same way, carbon dioxide is collected from each and every cell of the body and it is carried to the lungs and then it is exhaled or thrown out from the body. And all the extra salt, excess salts, extra water and nitrogenous waste like urea have to be removed from different parts of the body, and it has to be sent to the excretory system so that it can be thrown out from the body by excretion. So for that also, what is required? Circulating fluids in the body is required. Now, hormones are also secreted in our body by the endocrine system. These hormones must also be carried throughout the body by the circulating blood to act wherever it is required. So that is why circulating fluids are required in our. So the circulating fluids that transport substances in our body are of two types, the blood and the lymph. Apart from transport, these fluids have some other functions in the body as well. So the main fluids that is found in our body are, first is the blood. Where do you find the blood? You find it in the heart and in the blood vessels. When we talk about blood vessels, we are talking about arteries, veins and capillaries, and it is found in the circulatory system. The next type of fluid that is found in the body is known as tissue fluid. Where do you find tissue fluid? You find them in spaces between cells in the organs. The third type of fluid that is found in a body is the lymph. Where do you find the lymph? You find it inside lymph vessels and lymphatic organs like the spleen and the tonsil. So spleen and tonsil are examples of lymphatic organ. So let's take a look at this figure 8.1, which shows the relationship between blood, tissue, fluid and lymph as they circulate in their various vessels and spaces. Okay, so you can see the lungs, how the blood vessel, artery and the vein moves to the heart. Okay, and from the heart, arteries carry it to various parts of the body and the veins carry it back to the heart, and there we have the tissue fluid in between here in their own space, and then we have the lymph capillaries and the lymph which moves inside the lymph organs. Okay, and then again it is poured back into the veins before it reaches the heart. Okay, so you can see in the diagram the blood circulates in a closed manner all the time through the blood vessels. So this type of blood circulation is known as closed blood circulatory system. And against this, In certain animals, like in insects, the blood does not flow in blood vessels, but they flow through open spaces in the body, and this type of circulatory system is known as open blood circulatory system. Okay, that because the blood inside them flows from the heart to the body spaces without the help of any blood vessels. Okay, now there are some non-circulating fluids in our body as well. If you remember, when we did the skeleton chapter in the part 1 of this book, we talked about synovial fluid that is found in the skeletal joints, especially in the knees. And you will be learning about the vitreous humor in the eye, a fluid which is found in the eye, and they do not circulate, so therefore they are known as non-circulating fluid. Next, moving on to the properties of blood, you know that the blood is never stationary. It is continuously moving in the blood vessels from the heart to the arteries and back to the heart again through the veins, and again it goes to the lungs. Okay, so it does not stop. It is always in motion. Next, you know what is the color of the blood. The blood is it is a thick fluid. It is bright red when you take it from an artery, and it is dark red when it's taken from a vein. Remember, artery carries oxygen rich blood and vein carries carbon dioxide rich blood. Now, when we talk about the volume, an average adult human has 5 to 6 liters of blood in the body. And the taste, since we eat a lot of salt, it is saltish, and you all must have tasted blood when there is a cut or in the tongue or bleeding from the gums. So it is saltish. The blood is slightly alkaline, which has a pH of 7.3 to 7.45. You know that 7 is neutral, which is neither acidic nor alkaline. Now, moving on to the functions of blood. The main function of blood in our body is treated under 2 broad headings. One is transport of substances from one place to another place, and then the other is protection. So when we talk about transport by blood, we are talking about transport of digested food, oxygen, carbon dioxide, excretory substances, hormones, and body heat. Now, the first one is transport of digested food. You know that the food which is digested in the alimentary canal, it is taken to the tissues. These substances that are carried by the blood are simple sugars like glucose, amino acids, vitamins, mineral salts. That is the end product of digestion. Next is transport of oxygen from the lungs to the tissues. Now, this takes place by red blood cells in combination with hemoglobin in the form of an unstable compound which is known as oxyhemoglobin, which when reaching the tissue breaks up to give up oxygen. So you will see that hemoglobin combines with oxygen to form an unstable compound, oxyhemoglobin. Why is it called unstable? Because the oxygen will be given off easily when it reaches the cells or the tissue. Now, next is transport of carbon dioxide from the tissues to the lungs, because you know carbon dioxide must be excreted out. So it occurs partly in combination with hemoglobin and partly as solution in the blood plasma. That means the carbon dioxide will dissolve in the blood plasma and it is carried to the lungs, and a little bit of it is combined with hemoglobin and it is known as carbaminohemoglobin. Please remember, oxyhemoglobin is with oxygen and carbaminohemoglobin is the combination of hemoglobin with carbon dioxide. Now, next is transport of excretory material from the various tissues in our body to the liver, kidney, or the skin for elimination or to make them harmless. Next is the distribution of hormones. Hormones are secreted by special glands which are known as endocrine glands, and it is secreted directly into the blood, and it is the blood which carries it to wherever it is required. Next is distribution of heat. The blood helps in keeping our body temperature uniform because heat is distributed by the motion of blood. You know, the blood is in continuous motion. Now moving on to protection by blood. Now you know blood forms a clot wherever there is a cut in our blood vessels. Now you know when you cut your finger, you'll bleed for some time and very soon a blood clot is formed. What does the clot do? It serves to prevent further loss of blood, it will stop the bleeding, and it does not allow the entry of disease-causing germ. That means the clot will be a sort of, you can say it is formed on the wound, and disease-causing germs will not be able to enter through the wound. Now, the white blood corpuscles or the white blood cells protect the body from diseases by engulfing bacteria which may have entered the body. That is, the white blood cells will just catch the germs and make them harmless or destroy them. Okay, so that is how it protects our body. Next is the white blood cells produces antitoxins and antibodies which neutralize the poisonous substances or kill the germs which enter the body. That is how blood helps in protection. Now moving on to the composition of blood. Now the blood consists of a liquid part which is known as plasma, and it is about 50 to 66% of the blood. And next it has cells in the body, cellular parts or cellular elements, red blood cells, white blood cells and platelets, which is about 40 to 45% of the blood. Now, plasma is also known as the liquid part of the blood or liquid portion of the blood. The plasma is light yellow color and it is alkaline. What do you find in plasma? You find water 90 to 92%, proteins 7 to 8%, inorganic salts 1%, and there are certain other substances and traces, means very, very little quantity. When we talk about inorganic salts, we are talking about sodium chloride, that is the salt that we take in, sodium bicarbonate, and other substances that you find in the plasma are glucose, amino acids, fibrinogen, hormones, urea. There are so many different substances which is dissolved in the plasma. Okay, now the plasma from which the protein fibrinogen has been removed is called serum. Now, cellular elements. The formed or cellular elements of the blood are of three types: red blood cells, also known as erythrocytes, white blood cells known as leukocytes, and blood platelets known as thrombocytes. Now, red blood cells, also known as erythrocytes, are the oxygen carriers of the body. They are very minute, very, very small, biconcave, disc-like structures. You can see rounded disc-like structures. Biconcave means it has depression on both sides. Okay, depression on both sides. It is flat at the center, as you can see here, since it is biconcave, and it is rounded at the periphery. Okay, periphery means the side. Now they are very small in size. They measure about 7 micron in diameter. When we talk about a micron, you need to divide 1 millimeter. smallest part in your ruler, 1 centimeter is made up of 10 millimeters. So you divide 1 millimeter into 1000 parts, and the diameter of a red blood cell is 7 out of that. So you can imagine how tiny it is. Micron is represented by the symbol mu. Now, red blood cells are very small in size and they have concavities on either side. Why? To provide a large surface area, which makes them very efficient in absorbing oxygen, so that they can absorb a large amount of oxygen and carry it to the different parts of the body. The small size enables the red blood cells to travel through very fine capillaries in the body. In various parts of our body, the capillaries are so thin that the red blood cells have to walk or travel in a single line. An adult human male has about 5 million red blood cells per cubic millimeter of blood. Now, what do you mean by per cubic millimeter of blood? You draw a cube with 1 millimeter, very tiny. So, this tiny space in an adult male has about 5 million red blood cells, and an adult female slightly less, that is 4.5 million. Now, hemoglobin is the effective chemical constituent of red blood cells. The red blood cells have a body which is colorless and spongy. Okay, the body is also known as stroma, and the stroma, or the body of the red blood cells, contains a respiratory pigment which is known as hemoglobin, also abbreviated as HB. So in your one word answers, if you are to name a respiratory pigment, the answer is hemoglobin. Now, the hemoglobin is made up of two parts. The first one is an iron containing part which is known as hemin, and the next is a protein which is known as globin. So together they become hemoglobin. Now, hemoglobin can combine very easily or readily with oxygen, and it forms oxyhemoglobin, which is unstable, that, because the oxygen must be given out wherever it is required, whichever tissue it goes to, whichever cell it goes to. If that cell requires oxygen, the oxygen must be given away. Okay, so now when we talk about hemoglobin, remember, hemoglobin also combines with carbon dioxide, but very small amount, very small quantity of carbon dioxide combines with hemoglobin to form carbaminohemoglobin, and it is carried to the lungs. And remember, I had already told you previously that maximum of the carbon dioxide gets dissolved in the plasma. Hemoglobin has a very strong affinity for carbon monoxide. Very strong affinity means it catches hold of carbon monoxide, and it forms a stable compound which is known as carboxyhemoglobin. Okay, when carbon monoxide combines with hemoglobin, it forms carboxyhemoglobin. It is a stable compound. That means carbon monoxide, once it catches hold of hemoglobin, it will not leave the hemoglobin. So what will happen? The capacity of the blood transport of oxygen gets reduced. So that also results in death in some cases. This is known as carbon monoxide poisoning. Now, you must have heard about, people in cold countries or cold places. Sometimes they have, fire going on of coal, and then later in the morning they were found dead. So that is due to carbon monoxide poisoning. Why? Because the coal gives out carbon monoxide, and if the room is not well ventilated, what will happen? The coal uses oxygen to burn. The human beings or the people who are inside the room also uses up oxygen for breathing, and they are taking in carbon monoxide, which is given out by the coal. And what happens? The carbon monoxide forms a stable compound, and as a result, the level of oxygen in the body of the people will lower down, and ultimately the people will die. Okay, so that is known as carbon monoxide poisoning, which causes death. Okay, now moving on to the life and death of red blood cells. Now, in adults, red blood cells are produced, in the marrow of long bones, especially in the ribs, the breastbone, and the ilium of hip girdle. If you remember, we had discussed this in the skeletal system in the part 1 of this book. Now, in an embryo, that is the embryo when inside the mother's womb, bones are not yet formed. So where are the red blood cells produced? They are produced in the liver and the spleen. In children, until they reach 5 years, the red blood cells are produced in the bone marrow of all bones, not only the ribs, the breastbone, or the ilium of hip girdle, but they are produced in the bone marrow of all bones. Now, the mature red blood cells have no nuclei. It does not have any nucleus. But when they are being produced during cell division, they have one, because remember, in cell division, nucleus must get divided first. Okay, and as the red blood cells become mature, the nuclei are lost. That means they become enucleated. Enucleated means no nucleus. Now, the average life of an RBC is about 120 days. Once it is produced in the bone marrow, it comes out, okay, and after that it lives for only 120 days. The old and weak red blood cells are destroyed in the spleen, liver, and bone marrow. Okay, and when they are destroyed, remember, the iron part, that is the hemin, is retained in the liver. It is kept back in the liver, while the rest is excreted as bile pigment, which is also known as bilirubin, which is responsible for giving you the yellow color, especially in jaundice, and even urine is yellow in color, if you remember. So that is known as bile pigment. Now, in a normal adult, approximately 2 million red blood cells are destroyed every second. In other words, about 1% of the total erythrocytes in the body are destroyed every day. The red blood cells are deficient of certain cell organelles. That means certain cell organelles are not found in the red blood cells, but they are more efficient. Why? Because they can carry more oxygen. Okay, so when the mammalian red blood cells become mature, they circulate in the blood system, and they do not have certain cell organelles like nucleus, mitochondria, and endoplasmic reticulum are absent in red blood cells. So though these organelles are not present in the mature red blood cells, in reality, I already told you, they are more efficient in carrying out their job. What is their task? Picking up and delivering oxygen to various cells, to each and every cell of the body. The factors that make them more efficient is the loss of nucleus. Why? Because when the nucleus is lost, it makes the red cells biconcave. Remember the shape? Concave on both sides, because from here what was lost? Nucleus was lost. So as a result, what happens? Their surface area is increased and the volume ratio for absorbing more oxygen. Now, space in between is increased. That means more red blood cells can be accommodated in the same space. That means more number of red blood cells can cluster together in the same space. Next is loss of mitochondria. Remember what happens in the mitochondria? It is known as the powerhouse of the cell, where oxygen is used to release energy. So if there is no mitochondria, means that the red blood cells do not require oxygen for themselves. Okay, so all the oxygen that they take up from the lungs is taken and delivered to the tissues without being used in the red blood cells. Okay, and secondly, the loss of mitochondria means full transport of glucose in blood plasma unused by the red blood cells. And no endoplasmic reticulum means there is increased flexibility of red blood cells for their movement through very thin and narrow capillaries. That means they become very flexible. Endoplasmic reticulum is the skeleton of the cell, if you remember. Okay, so they become flexible, they can easily move, they can easily squeeze through very small and narrow capillaries. Okay, this is all, children. We will continue in the next upload. Till then, stay safe, and if you have any problem, please get to me in the WhatsApp group. Have a great day. God bless you.